And I request you to chair this session after introducing the first performance. Over to you.
जी सर, आप वहीं बात करेंगे, ये फॉर लाइव स्ट्रीमिंग है। शो फैंस ऑफ कर दो। विभू भाई,
इतना शोर है।
मैम सर इज सेइंग इज टू नॉइजी।
It will be
मैम आई एम प्लेसिंग बोर्ड्स मैम।
to bring the fans down there.
वो हम फैंस को नीचे रखवा दो मैम के पास, जो बिल्डिंग साइड में कोई एक फैन आवाज कम।
Should I? Yeah. Dear friends, I'm very happy to introduce to you
ये वाला जैक मुझे चाहिए।
Professor Marjorie is a Hollywood experience. She was born, she was brought up in
ये तो बोल रहे हैं
She had an undergraduate education in Kashmir and her postgraduate education in Kashmir. So you have the most original specimen of intellectual perfection in her. She rose from the rank of a lecturer to the rank of a professor, and she has been professor for the last several years in the University of Kashmir. And she has supervised MPhil and PhD research, and she has produced quite a number of scholars in both fields. She has also published more than 16 essays in journals, and she has also a book of essays published independently in her name. And this morning, she is speaking on the subject which you know very well by now. I welcome Ifat Maqbool to deliver her keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dhar, for those very kind words of introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. At the outset, I'd like to thank the organizing committee of Melow, Chairperson, Professor Manju Jadika, for her kind invitation to participate in the 26th International Conference on Challenges in Adaptation, Interplay of Tradition and Modernity, organized in collaboration with the Department of English, Central University of Himachal Pradesh. Professor Manpreet Kaur Kang, Professor Debarati Bandyopadhyay, Professor Roshan Lal for their warmth and hospitality throughout our correspondence and interactions. I also hope that there is future collaboration, both individual and institutional, between the Department of English, University of Kashmir and Melow, as well as with the Department of English here at the Central University of Himachal Pradesh. As I said, I'm honored to be in such distinguished company, Professor Harish Trivedi, Professor Poonam Trivedi, Professor T. Andhar, Professor Krishnan, Unni, other eminent academicians and faculty members, both from the country and abroad, dear research scholars and students. Before I begin, I'd like to provide you an outline of my presentation. I've divided the presentation into 3 sections. In the first section, I make a few preliminary remarks about the concepts of originality and authorship. In the second section, I give an overview of adaptation studies, its evolution, its scope, and I highlight important scholarship in the area. I also identify some, adaptation is identified later on in this section as transformative as well as purposive. The last section briefly situates adaptation in the current climate of digital culture and poses questions about the efficacy of adaptation studies today. Dependence, liberation, and creativity, reimagining the power of adaptation, the adaptation question. I want to begin by examining the question of adaptation, not in the strict sense of a relation between a prior text and a secondary text, but with the deeper question of adaptation and its interrelationship with authorship and originality. The question of originality is a perplexing academic debate, with proponents and detractors forcefully claiming either legitimacy or the impossibility of the idea. While this is not the key concern of this paper, it might provide a useful framework for understanding the practice of adaptation as we understand it today. Tied up with the question of originality is authorship, and modern debates destabilize the idea of the author as a fixed sovereign creator of the text and posit authorship as an indeterminate and fluid category. Rejecting the individual as origin of the text, theorists like Harold Bloom and T.S. Eliot and Roland Barthes, etc., have questioned the centrality of the author by positing oppositional formulations. So we have an Oedipal struggle with the parent author, an allegiance to tradition, the idea of relationality of texts, and of course, as some kind of a definitive blow, the death of the author. What these postulations also share is the foregrounding of language and its primacy in creating literary texts, a kind of emptying out of any subjective element in the authorial personality. It is language that speaks, and writing is the circulation of language itself. One important implication of declaring the author as dispensable is the corresponding entry of the reader into the creation of textual meaning. We are reminded that readers, instead of being passive receivers of texts, are conscious agents of interpretation. Textual meaning is dynamic, temporal, and transactional, rather than static and spatial. However enticing the postulation of a depersonalized author may sound, there will always be scope for the individual dimension, what Jonathan Bates identified as, quote unquote, the irreducible subjective core. In spite of being already constructed and created by linguistic and ideological structures and metamorphosing into a scripter, the author can be claimed as a living and breathing entity, and one can here posit the idea of human singularity. Human singularity is the unique, unrepeatable quality of a literary work, and its simultaneous participation in generic codes and norms. The reader's encounter with the singularity of the work is a recognition of the otherness that compels a change in his or her frameworks of understanding and feeling. So every reading, therefore, is singular, in that the reader and the context of reading will always be different. Derek Attridge, in The Singularity of Literature, points to a literary text as an event, and much like Barthes, he stresses that literature involves the text and its reader in a complicated and creative cultural, historical, and temporal reading. Basing his argument on the idea of invention, alterity, and singularity, he establishes how this trinity of invention, alterity, and singularity lies at the heart of art as a practice and as an institution. Determining exactly how unique something should be to be considered original is a concept that can be wrestled with incessantly. However, modern scholarship has also demonstrated that borrowing and originality can be compatible. If literature is a matrix built on a networking of many factors like cultural memory, linguistic structures, universal archetypes, borrowing is not only universal, but inevitable. And therefore, there is no right or specific way to determine how much borrowing constitutes a dearth of originality. In contemporary times, with the inevitable decrease of the realm of traditional notions of originality, the idea of what it means to be an author has changed considerably. John Barth's influential essay on narrative fiction, which is based largely on the study of American fiction, The Literature of Exhaustion, drew attention to the proliferation of literary forms and conventions resulting in a state of saturation, or what he called the used upness of literary forms. In a companion essay, Literature of Replenishment, he offers a counter by arguing that through a process of synthesis and transformation, and I quote, artistic conventions can be deployed against themselves to generate new and lively work, unquote. One can perhaps infer that in artistic production, exhaustion and replenishment are complementary rather than oppositional categories. In today's digitally controlled culture, where endless repetitions, remakes, sequels, mashups, and remixes are far more dominant than the original, the idea of originality and authorship have become increasingly complicated and challenging. Adaptation studies shift from fidelity, which is the subtitle, which I will just read out now. After this brief prelude about the slippery terrain of authorship and originality, I now come to the theme of the seminar, which is adaptation. There are two broad ways of approaching the term. One, that adaptation is as old as literary production, the idea that stories beget stories and text begets texts. And the second is our current understanding of adaptation as an overt attempt at reworking or retelling a source text and transferring it via another medium and thereby creating a new or a target text. As a cultural practice, adaptation signals a dialogue and movement between texts and has immense potential for expanding the debates around intertextuality, authorship, originality, and canon making. Adaptation is also a context-dependent process which draws its meaning from the readings or viewings offered or enabled in a given socio-temporal and cultural context. As an academic discipline, adaptation studies is highly multidisciplinary and traverses literature, film studies, digital media, etc. Characterized by a dynamic and ever-evolving aesthetic paradigm, it is one of the most hard to describe theoretical fields. However, one can identify points of origin, development, and evolution. Once fixated on the literature versus film equation, adaptation studies has diversified and produced a rigorous body of scholarship, and given the staggering diversity of adaptation today, especially in the post-digital era, a standardized idea of adaptation is not only impossible, but perhaps undesirable. The point worth making is that it is precisely because adaptation will never be bound by a single standard, since the impulse and aim of adaptation will always vary, that adaptation studies continues to throw up heterogeneous models even as we speak. Another important implication for the scope of adaptation studies is its immense cross-genre focus, making it particularly relevant in today's cultural climate of media convergence, or what is I call the media continuum. The earliest attempts at adaptation in a cross-genre sense are from literature into film, and it's primarily these two aesthetic categories that have formed the staple of adaptation studies in the early decades of the 20th century. Identified as the prehistory of adaptation studies, this phase is perhaps indecisive and inconclusive for its generalized observations about fiction and film, rather than a focus on adaptation per se. As a clue, we can go to Virginia Woolf's 1927 short but revealing essay, The Cinema, which she wrote as a response to a screening of a silent German expressionistic horror film. Writing from the standpoint of a virtuoso modernist, Woolf is trying to come to terms with this new artistic medium at that time. However, she is receptive to the psychic undercurrents that the visual medium can represent, and its then current limitations, such as what she calls an over-reliance on literary material. I quote, "The alliance is unnatural," she declares about the adaptation of novels into films. And I quote again, "Eye and brain are torn asunder ruthlessly as they try vainly to work in couples. The eye says, 'Here is Anna Karenina, a voluptuous lady in black velvet wearing pearls comes before us,' but the brain says, that is no more Anna Karenina than it is Queen Victoria," unquote. She complains that movie makers, instead of relying on the inherent properties of cinema, harness the making of images to storytelling by way of literature, and presumably failing to understand that cinema's distinctive power involves creating a new kind of visual experience. That was Woolf, unquote. Woolf's own fiction is highly cinematic and would later be transformed into very successful film adaptations. But here the essay serves as an instance of the nascent phase of adaptation. But with time, a disciplinary roadmap will begin to appear. The early phase of adaptation studies is characterized by its dependence, as I just said, on the novel-film equation and what is famously called the fidelity factor. While the burden of fidelity still haunts many approaches to adaptation. It is now viewed as a futile approach and vehemently rejected as the sole condition of a successful adaptation. However, its persistence still hovers, and fidelity has also been called, quote unquote, the undead spirit in adaptation studies. The preoccupation with literature and film continues in what Thomas Leach calls the 1.0 phase of adaptation studies, although the methodological and disciplinary boundaries also begin to emerge around this time. A foundational work is George Bluestone's Novels into Film, 1957, which addresses the question of adaptation by referring to the quote-unquote mysterious alchemy by which books become films, and goes on to establish the two as distinct aesthetic genres. The work has been slightly critiqued for its short-sightedness regarding the potential of cinema because it's heavily reliant on text. He points out, I quote, "Changes are inevitable the moment one abandons the linguistic for the visual medium," unquote. Perhaps the first theorist to bring to light the notion of medium specificity, Bluestone takes away attention not only from fidelity, but is in line with Linda Hutchins' classic work, A Theory of Adaptation, 2006, which makes a case for understanding adaptation not as product, but as process. Brian McFarlane's novel to film, 1996, similarly deplores the fidelity approach by arguing, and I quote, "The insistence on fidelity has led to a suppression of potentially more rewarding approaches to the phenomenon of adaptation. It tends to ignore the idea of adaptation as an example of convergence among the arts, and it marginalizes those production determinants which have nothing to do with the novel, but may be powerfully influential in film." Unquote. The work provides rich insights into adaptation, but like Bluestone's, is heavily reliant on film and text, and follows the case study model by examining film adaptations of some major Euro-American novels. By the 1990s, the field of adaptation studies has expanded, and it is with Linda Hutchins' A Theory of Adaptation that the turn from fidelity and adaptation's moment of legitimacy arrives. Hutchins provided a redirection for adaptation studies, and subsequent theorists have particularly relied upon and expanded on her formulation of adaptation, not as product, but as process. Hutchins rejects fidelity criticism and its obsession with fidelity, and alludes to an inbuilt hierarchy between text and film, as stemming from what she identifies, I think it is Robert Stamm's terms, iconophobia and logophilia. Interestingly, this binary between a primacy according to the written word or literature and aversion to the visual has been reversed in contemporary culture, where it is the visual that has now completely overtaken the written. One could well argue that quick adaptation has become the default practice of our culture, where the interface between different screens, the instant transfer of content between gadgets has added impetus to the act of adaptation. Going back to fidelity, the fidelity factor is based on the premise of a hierarchical recognition of literature as a primary and somewhat superior form, where the sole purpose of an adapted text is to conform to the original, and any blatant departure or deviance is viewed as tampering, interference, violation, even desecration. This points to two things. One, a presumed hierarchy between distinct mediums, which need to be examined on their own aesthetic terms and not by recourse to conflating the demands of both. Second, that adaptation should only work backwards and be always subservient to some imagined obligation to a prior text. While a default relationship always exists with the original work, adaptation studies has benefited greatly from looking ahead. In more academic terms, these are identified as the archival and the teleological approach. Conventionally, adaptation had most often been theorized in archival terms. That is, adaptations were defined primarily with reference to their source texts, as if the adaptation had a responsibility towards the source text. One of them being to recreate the spirit or essence of the original text. On further scrutiny, the essence or spirit, the so-called essence or spirit of a text or a work is seen as a highly subjective and often partisan approach to a text. It sees the text as a closed entity frozen in time and space, whereas, as was argued in the beginning of this paper, there is endless potential for reinterpretation and reconfiguration. Modern readings, for example, have been more accurate to racism, misogyny, sexism, and other ideological biases in source texts. What has fortunately gained momentum is the teleological approach, a looking forward which is more descriptive and analytical, free from any anxiety or judgment. This descriptive model has opened up the field immensely, as it poses questions directly related to the demands of the adaptive process. That is, the fascinating exchange of media, the creation of new and even novel texts. In other words, the approach that views the source-target relationship as dialectical rather than one of dependence. What fidelity criticism missed is that the transference of a story from one medium to another involves a creative rewriting of the codes of one medium into a completely different one. The idea of medium specificity, which dominated adaptation studies for long, needs to be examined in some detail. Adaptation involves not replication, but transference from one genre or medium to another. And since each art form has its own communicational strategies and aesthetic demands, adaptation involves a cross-genre enrichment that goes beyond the pursuit of fidelity. Therefore, adaptations can not only transform, but perhaps even amplify the meaning and scope of a source text. And this is nowhere better exemplified than in film and theater and musical adaptations of literary texts, not to speak of graphic and digital narratives. Because the book gets transferred into a film or a play or even a comic or a graphic text, there are new and compelling ways in which the primary text is reimagined. One recalls many powerful adaptations that have not only brought to life, but enhanced the source text. Cinematization, as we all know, unlike literature, is a multi-track medium and has various expressive modes, particularly sound, image, and performance, all blend into a narrative that at times better the original. One can recall powerhouse performances that have reimagined and resurrected our favorite literary characters. Hamlet has been played by as diverse a range of actors as Sohrab Modi, Laurence Olivier, Mel Gibson, and Shahid Kapoor, and each actor plays Hamlet in the same yet different manner, as if there is an ongoing interplay between various Hamlets, enriching and transforming the prototype along the way. And Ajay Devgan reenacting an Othello infuses a rural Indian avatar, thereby multiplying the trajectory of the Shakespearean hero. The music of both Haider and Omkara by Vishal Bhardwaj attests to the amplifying nature of an adaptation, whether it is the opening song of Omkara with its ominous overtones of Sabse Bada Ladaiya Re Omkara, or the chilling lyricism of the same song, Jab Parnalon Se Khoon Bahe. The song functions not only as a parallel to the introduction of Othello's Othello in Act 1 in the original, but is a peculiar, culturally located and creative intervention in the reimagining of Othello's power and vulnerability. In the same film, the song Naina Thag Lenge becomes a musical representation of the theme of visual mistrust that surrounds the Shakespearean tragedy. Similarly, the Bismil song in Haider is both a counterpart to the play within a play and a spectacular Bollywood-style dance and song intervention that is beautifully choreographed to enact the theme of betrayal. Going back to the phases of adaptation studies, it is an adaptation. I'm using Thomas Leach's paradigm of 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. So it is in adaptation studies 2.0 that adaptation studies develops an intertextual approach by becoming attentive to all forms of adaptation. The novel film equation is not now the sole domain of adaptation studies, and popular culture is equally used in addition to the literary canon. Adaptations can now include transformations from not only text to film, but film to text, which is called novelization, film to comic book to film, and even video games. So it's very circular rather than linear. In Adaptation Revisited, I'm just giving a brief overview of some important scholarship of the present. In Adaptation Revisited television and the classic novels, Sarah Caldwell incorporated TV adaptations of canonical novels, which led to further expansion of the canon of adaptation studies. Camilla Elliott, in revisiting the novel-film debate, is skeptical about the absolute demarcation between film and literature. Instead of media-specific dualities or binaries, she posited a reciprocal or analogous model in which both adaptive and adapting texts were already deeply implicated in signifying systems and therefore did not run counter to each other, but converged on many points. As we all know, a film is always already a script. Cinema possesses literary qualities, and literature can be cinematic. Robert Stam, in Literature Through Film and A Companion to Literature and Film, reoriented adaptation studies by establishing adaptation as an intertextual impulse that is at the heart of every text that springs from and in turn generates other texts. Drawing on Jared Genet, Julia Kristeva, Stam proposes that adaptation be viewed as intertextual dialogism and foregrounds Genet's terminology. I will not go into the detail. Foregrounds Genet's terminology, especially the coinages hypotext and hypertext. So a hypotext is a base text from which a series of hypertexts emerge. And because the dynamic is non-linear, the scope for hypertexts is limitless. Stam also stresses on adaptation as a form of translation, whereby a model of intersemiotic transposition becomes possible. I move on to another section, which is titled Purposive Adaptation. Adaptations also need to be viewed as purposive, which is referred to as transformative reimagining. No text, as we all know, is ever created out of a cultural vacuum and is always susceptible to ideological scrutiny. Adaptation has productively contested dominant discourses, providing alternative viewpoints, and it is here that adaptation has proved immensely beneficial in examining the canon and the unilateral flow and reception of ideas. One can recall powerful adaptations of English canonical texts and even films that foreground a previously mute or marginal perspective. Robinson Crusoe, The Tempest, Jane Eyre, the list can go on, have been rewritten to unveil the politics of race and gender hierarchies, implicit but not acknowledged in the original text. The term transformative therefore points towards the act of alteration that creates unlimited potentialities. By opening up the canon to interrogation, these adaptations inject new dialogical life into known narratives. Adaptations from non-Western cultures and the global South in particular have proved remarkably successful in producing a counter-canon to the Western literary canon. Since a transformative reimagining critically evaluates its source texts, analyzing and problematizing its tropes and authority by writing them fresh, it becomes an act of literary criticism itself. Adaptation as process, and therefore writing as process and reading as process, interrogates stereotypes, problematizes norms in source texts, and encourages readers to engage in a similar process. Discovering new possibilities for a known narrative allows readers to reconceptualize and destabilize their own notions of individual truth. For example, reading a fairy tale adaptation with a colored protagonist, watching a woman superhero save the world, has immense potential for reader empowerment. As an instance of the fraught ideological complexities of post-colonial adaptations, Tayeb Saleh's Season of Migration to the North both undercuts Conrad's Heart of Darkness and plays with the trope of the exotic Moor as depicted in Othello. Tayeb Saleh's assertion, and I quote, "Othello, there is no Othello. Othello is a lie," unquote, is a rejection of Othello's tragic nobility and as well as an instance of disidentification, colonial critique, and authentic self-fashioning. While canon expansion is certainly an outcome of purposive adaptation, there's also a converse postulation, which is that studies point out that adaptation, particularly of canonical English writers like Austen and Dickens, which begins as early as the 19th century, when perhaps Dickens is still living, has, so I'll read this again. So while canon expansion is certainly an outcome of purposive adaptation, studies also point out that adaptation, particularly of canonical English writers like Austen and Dickens, has ensured that they enjoy a permanent afterlife in literary culture. Arguing that adaptations tacitly bestow longevity and canonicity to select works, this approach posits that since certain texts get regularly adapted and appropriated, their staying power or cultural longevity gets solidified via adaptation. Moving on to some examples of adaptations, let me begin with the English canon. In adaptation studies, the Shakespearean canon has perhaps the longest afterlife, and his work has been adapted from nearly every possible corner of the world, making him perhaps our greatest contemporary. How does one view a Shakespearean adaptation? taking a reverential, essentialist view of the universal genius of Shakespeare would have meager significance in the adaptation process and would insist on his position as the fixed, unshakable voice of a single culture and the common idea of Shakespeare as the universal genius. However, things are not that simple. Shakespeare was a master at adaptation, and most of his plays are based on earlier sources. And taking a cue from this, the Shakespearean text, already an intertext, adapted into something new and far removed from the source, is then just a first in a series of adaptations, which adaptation studies today calls the hypertext continuum. Rather than view the modern adaptations of Shakespeare through the prism of error and fidelity, rather than view the modern adaptations of Shakespeare through the prism of error and infidelity, any Shakespearean adaptation is an act of what adaptation studies calls creative infidelity, which is the hermeneutic notion present in adaptation. So by opening up a prior classic text and transforming it into a contemporary narrative, these adaptations are perhaps more reflective of their authors and times more than they are of Shakespeare. Because Shakespeare has been appropriated and adapted in India more than in any other non-Western culture, it is worthwhile to briefly talk about the Indianization of Shakespeare, which begins in the colonial era and has continued well into the present. From theatre to folk performances to mainstream Bollywood cinema, vernacular and regional transmutations, Shakespeare has undergone a range of cultural and temporal relocations. The implications are many: indigenization, transculturation, and revisionism. The Desi Shakespeare offers a feast of adaptations ranging from the faithful to the more radical. Vishal Bhardwaj's film adaptations have rightly earned critical acclaim for his dexterous use of Shakespeare to present a localized tale, as well as run counter to the original to further his own individual artistic vision. Similarly, other canonical English writers have been reopened, now with a critical eye, in order to redress the colonial equation and ideological premises of English cultural complacency. Tanika Gupta has been successful in transcultural adaptations, or what has been termed the cultural boomeranging effect of adaptation, whereby her alterations of Dickens and Ibsen in particular have immense political value as interventionist theatre. I come now to the last section of my paper, which is adaptation as a cultural practice in today's digital culture. Going along with Thomas Leach's chronology of the three phases of adaptation, this is phase 3.0 or even post 3.0 phase of adaptation studies. The major redirection in this phase is, of course, towards an embrace of digital culture, which offers what is called read-write literacy, as opposed to read-only literacy of print culture. There is incessant global movement and transfer of texts, leading to a new kind of digital creativity in the present. Also, digital media allows audience immersion, thereby pointing to a newfound agential role for the erstwhile reader or audience. One of the reasons why adaptation studies needs special attention is because we are surrounded by new and at times wacky forms of adaptation. Our scroll time attests to this. Remakes of songs, remakes of remakes, TikTok, memes, etc. Blurring the boundaries between audience and creator, this new media landscape has newer implications for the state of adaptation studies. Situated in this state of what is called media convergence or media continuum, adaptation studies today is comfortably placed within the fluid boundaries of what is called culture studies. Here it is viewed as a cultural practice because it is at the intersection of literary studies and film studies. So here it is viewed as a cultural practice that embraces pluralism, is inclusivist, transgresses media cultural hierarchies, is cross-cultural perhaps in a willful way, more web-like than straightforwardly linear in its creative dynamic. A kind of a present-day practice totally attentive to these new interchanges and shifting models of adaptation. However, conversely, the instant and ephemeral nature of today's digital adaptations can prove counterproductive, making adaptation studies a catch-all phrase to include everything. It is here that one can posit the role of media literacy, which promotes discernment and critique of the flood of content that assails us minute by minute. Similarly, as far as the pedagogy of adaptation studies is concerned, there are innumerable challenges. How can adaptation studies be effective at a time when we speak of a crisis in the humanities, a crisis bordering on indifference and dysfunctional imaginations? The humanities student no longer reads, let alone grapples with texts. Cinema, if at all grips his or her attention, is entertainment. How can one restore critical acumen? In today's classrooms, and I speak from experience, reading texts and correlating them with films is met with blank looks and incomprehension. There seems to be an impasse of sorts, and one can only speculate about the efficacy of teaching adaptation studies. Or perhaps, to be more optimistic, can a remix, a TikTok, or a mashup give us an entry point into teaching adaptation effectively to today's generation? Can adaptation studies revive both forgotten pursuits, reading and the appreciation of film? I leave that open for all of us to ponder. Thank you. I hope.
Thank you, Ifat Makbul. It was a very compact and also very rewarding presentation because it's a combination of too many things for a person to comprehend within a very short time of 30 minutes. If I can usefully recollect some of the things that she said, in the main, she focused on three things. First of all, the notion of adaptability actually touches upon the very complex issue of originality and authorship and the role of the reader. We know the role of the reader has been on for such a long time now, but adaptation gives it a new slant, which I think most of us need to consider very seriously, especially when the notion of a person adapting something in terms of the fidelity to the original is diminishing slowly. Therefore, adaptation itself becomes a very problematic category. The second and the most important part of the presentation was actually about the theories that have come up about adaptation, particularly of the theory of Linda Hutcheon, in which she says that the important thing is not about the product, but the important thing is the process. And in this process, there is a possibility of too many changes occurring while the text is being transformed from one shape into the other shape. And then she gave us very copious examples, especially of Hamlet, to show how Hamlet changes as it moves from one form of adaptation to the other. I particularly like the part dealing with the scholarship on this, especially when she's talking about the shift of the medium from the text, the films to the text. In the original, for a long time, the adaptations were confined mostly to the films, the verbal text to the visual text. But now we are moving into areas where there are greater possibilities of able to animated forms of adaptation and graphic forms of adaptation. And according to her, and which is quite easily understandable, it adds a great deal of richness to the kind of things that actually are eventually produced. Although we may be focusing most of the time on the process, but the product is equally important because product is something which comes to the reader as such. Then I think one interesting observation that she made towards the end, and which I'm sure many people would be talking about in the sessions to come, is about how the process of adaptation actually adds to the richness of the texts. Because we know a text only as something which is fixed and immutable. But as we go on adapting it into different shapes and forms, the text itself goes through a process of what she calls liberation and recreation. Although at some point it might seem that it is also getting destabilized. But the question is this destabilizes the process and the product, what we get in both? Are they useful? Are they interesting? And do they add to the richness of what we have been used to reading for a long time? And then finally, she also dwelt on the idea of how to teach pedagogic aspects of teaching literary studies and adaptations. And there, I think she left lots of things to be discussed by us because she didn't say anything very definite about that. And it seems that this is an area which probably should engage us more in the sessions to come, whether it's a liberating process, whether it's an enriching process, and how exactly are we going to teach it. With that, I hope that the sessions that will follow will probably modify, if not already change, what they might have to say in the days to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ifat Makbul ma'am, for such an insightful talk on reclaiming the power of adaptation. I also thank Professor T. N. Dhar for enlightening us further on the subject. May I now request Professor Manju Jedka ma'am for the felicitation of our keynote speaker, Professor Ifat Makbul ma'am. Please give a big round of applause. I now request Professor Manpreet Khan ma'am, Secretary Melow, to please come up to the stage to honor Professor T. N. Dhar sir, the chair of the session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. I invite Ma'am Manju Jedka to please come up here and enlighten us further.
Okay. What's your name? Swastik. Swastik. Thank you, Swastik. Ifat, thank you so much. It was all that we expected and much more than that. And I'm sure our scholars would really benefit from your talk. It is recorded and it is on YouTube. The link will be shared with you if you cannot locate it on your own. Thank you very much, Ifat, and Professor Dhar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ifat, I hope in future also you will join some of our conferences. And one day we will bring Melow to Srinagar. If not Melow, then mini Melow, but certainly we will. I am now going to request Professor Roshan Sharma, where are you? Oh, you're already there, huh? Professor Roshan Sharma, may I usher you in? And Sumanta Sarkar, please. come onto the stage. And while they're still settling down, I have a little announcement to make to all our delegates. It is something that is not really academic, but something that is useful. You know, we all get these name tags, and sometimes you don't want to wear them, and as soon as you reach home, you just throw them away. So I would request you to wear them all 3 days, and at the end of the third day, at the valedictory, if you don't want to keep them as mementos, we'll have a box there in which you can put them, and we can recycle them for the next conference, because we believe in sustainability, you know, the SDG goals. So wear your tags 3 days, and the third day, don't throw them away. इनका सम्मान करो और एक डब्बे में हम इकट्ठा करके we'll use them next time. Yeah. Okay. So over to Roshan. Roshan, please introduce our speaker and carry out the session. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. So we've already gotten going. Thank you very much, Professor Ifat, Professor T. Dhar. We are into it now. We exactly know where we have to go and how we have to go. I mean, to a great extent, we know, of course, we are going to explore it, negotiate it our ways, diverse ways, different ways, you know, that are open for contestations. And some of the ways, of course, they turn out to be prescriptive as we hear them. But then, of course, upon discussing them, you know, in open sessions, every single idea starts taking shape differently. So this process goes on, and it's a privilege to be chairing this session. Thank you, Ma'am Jaitka. Thank you very much. And today's speaker, in fact, is Mr. Sumanta Sarkar, a young speaker. Sumanta, in fact, has an experience of more than a decade, around 13, 14 years in creative industry. And primarily, you know, he does theater, and he actually believes that this theater could be used as a tool for social and personal transformation. And that's precisely what remains, you know, at the core of any argument that he makes. You know, he has various. I mean, in my discussion with him, he says, I mean, it's a whole range of roles that he has been playing, like as an actor and director and mentor for theater, films, television commercials. And then his approach, by and large, to the kind of work that he does, and we'll get to know about that, is, you know, he does adaptation. The praxis of adaptation, I would say, is what, you know, would come to the fore when he comes up with his presentation. So he adapts from literary sources, and he adapts for the stage and at times for screen, you know, to create what he terms impactful stories that have impact of a different kinds, of course. And then he has collaborated, you know, variedly. He has worked with organizations like the Indian Museum, US Consulate, UNICEF, CRY, which is Child Rights NGO, and multiple organizations of Tibet in exile. He's here, he's based in Dharamshala these days, and he works with the Tibetan children. And his projects have been featured on various platforms, such as Z5, Hotstar, and the Hollywood productions. And there are certain other professions as well that he, in fact, you know, he has taken up. He's a practicing psychological counselor, which enhances the storytelling by providing a deeper understanding of human emotions. And in the role of a counselor, also he's active. Today, what he's going to present before us is, he wants to, in fact, discuss the art of visual adaptation And how he's titled it is, it's interesting, makes a lot of sense, for those especially who are interested in adaptation studies. It's from page to stage and screen. So we understand, how three different genres are involved, and in the process of his presentation, it's not necessary that he stays confined only to these three genres. He might bring in certain other genres as well. Let's listen into Sumanta. Sumanta, it's all yours. Thank you.
At first, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really honored to share the stage, the space with such wonderful people who have so much insightful thoughts and things to say, to share. So, we stand at a very unique crossroads in the world of art, especially from where I belong, my industry, my work, my practices, the way I do storytelling, all this uh, all this way down towards the literature, it has started very, very long back. It's nothing new that we are working on adaptation and we are facing the challenges and we are also coming up with the solutions. Since a very long time, so many years, like it's been more than 100 years we are working on cinemas, at least in India, more than that in outside of India. And theater started around 2500 years ago in this world. But the way we have started adapting literature, we have faced a lot of multiple dimensions already. My fellow senior already, she has explained a lot of perspectives and touched my industries also, my perspectives also. I completely agree with that in most of the places. So for centuries, our narratives been passed down through generations. First through oral traditions, then through the written word. Today, the digital age and ever-evolving technologies present us with a profound question. How do we honor our literary past while embracing the innovative future of storytelling in theater and film? See, most of us, we are aware of film, but very few are aware of theater. Though in our personal life, we all have dramas, but I'm talking about stage productions. So, especially in Himachal, there are very less places, very less people we practice or we have experienced face-to-face theater productions. That's a completely different dimension. And my root belongs to theater more than film. I love theater. So the adaptation of literature is not a new concept, as I said. It is it is as old as stories themselves, from the Greek tragedies to Shakespearean plays. Artists have always reimagined and reinterpreted classic texts, but now with the tools like virtual reality, motion captures, like few of our friends are already capturing, we are also trying to capture those literary content and coming up with new things that is called movies. And immersive soundscapes. So today, a few years back only, when the radio area is gradually losing its own root, the new thing has started, that is audio story. A lots of applications, softwares, and websites are there. They are also coming up with the new era of adaptation, that is audio storytelling. And so the immersive soundscape is a very prominent thing now. We can push all these boundaries now further than ever before. We can transport audience not just to a new world, rather into it. The challenge. and the beauty lies in finding the balance. That's where everything is getting more magical and also stuck at sometimes. The balance is the true fact. The harmonious blending is the true fact in between this tradition and innovation, the things we are talking about. Tradition provides the foundation, the timeless theme, the rich characters, the emotional core of a story. Innovation, on the other hand, gives us the freedom to experiment with form, to reach new audience, and to tell these stories in a way that were once unimaginable. What is happening with these new adaptations? Not everyone can imagine a text. Not everyone can make a picture while listening or reading a story. The new era of adaptation is helping since last so many years, like mostly theaters, mostly films, because film has bigger reach. Then theater, then audio stories, then new things. Like when I say movie, it's not like feature films or short films. It is also animations. It is also cartoons, and it is also stop motions. They all are movies because they are moving towards the end with carrying the story behind. So these things are not new, but yet every new movies looks like wow, this is new. But again, as I said, the balance is a factor. This is in theater. Let me explain a bit more about what happens in theater. In theater, this means of going beyond a simple stage production. For example, the play Mughal-e-Azam. It was primarily a play, then a movie. A play Mughal-e-Azam, the musical, didn't just tell the story from the classic film. It used elaborate sets, costumes, and choreography to create a spectacle that honored the cinematic epic while offering a unique live experience. In film, it means using cutting edge technologies to bring classic literature to life. A great example is, as already have mentioned, uh, the great example is Vishal Bharadwaj's film adaptations of Shakespeare, film like Makbul, an adaptation of Macbeth, and Heather, based on Hamlet. Reimagine these timeless tragedies in modern Indian setting, making them relevant to a new generation. So you have to understand one thing, literature is very much available, but the classic literatures are not much available to today's people or the kids they are growing now. These takes are fading away. You will not get every single original text on PDF. And let's forget about the books. Books are becoming dinosaurs day by day. So what we have? PDFs. PDFs cannot give you the feel of a book reading. Yes, for that Kindle is there, thanks to few software developers, but film gives you more strength to imagine. It can be, as I said, films has multiple dimensions. It's not just a 2 hours or 3 hours movie that you watch in theater halls. It can be short films, animation, cartoons, and many other things. So this is not about replacing the old with the new. It's about a conversation between the past and the future. It's about respecting the essence of literary work while being bold enough to give it a new life. We are the guardian We are the guardians of these stories. And it is our duty to ensure they continue to resonate with the new generations. And it is a big responsibility. And I guess I also count myself in that new generation. Let us embrace these responsibilities with creativity, passion, and a commitment to both the timeless art of storytelling and endless possibilities of innovation. So, I will not talk about this for a longer time. As I requested Roshanji, I would like some questions, some interactive part of my presentation. Now, gradually, I'll going to finish with my presentation, and let's see if we can have some questions, some interactions. Let's make it more informal and informative, and let's exchange something. So, like, according to my understanding, the key points for adaptations, the first and very important, honoring the source material. The best adaptation respect the core themes, characters, and emotional truth of the original work. This isn't about a word for word translations, but about capturing the spirit of a story. For example, while a film like Three Idiots, I hope everyone has watched Three Idiots, most of you at least, uh, is loosely based on Chetan Bhagat's novel, Five Point Someone. But to be very honest, very less of us know about Five Point Someone. But we all know about Three Idiots. Here it says a lot of things. Why adaptation and how? As I have already mentioned, loosely adapted, not completely. So it has taken the essence, not the entire theme or story. Adaptation can be like that also. So it captures the core themes of a friendship in conventional education and passion while taking creative liberties with the plot. Next point would be embracing new medium. As I said, right now we have so many new mediums, and who knows, AI is coming up with a lot of new things. A successful adaptation understands the unique strength of its new medium. What works on the page might not work on the stage or screen, isn't it? So, for instance, the film like Devdas has been adapted numerous times, but each version, from the Bimal Roy classic to Sanjay Leela Bhansali's opulent spectacle, uses the visual and emotional power of cinema differently to tell the tragic love story. It's the same story, but different presentation, different bioscope. Then comes creative reinterpretation. It's a very interesting thing for me also. Adaptation is an act of creative reinterpretation itself. So it allows for modern perspectives, updated language, and a fresh lens through which to view classic stories, making them relevant to today's audience. As we have heard the name already today, Makbul is a prime example, um, where Macbeth's theme of ambition and the betrayal and the brilliantly executed by the artists and directors and lots of people. At the same time, it shows like the set against the backdrop of Mumbai underworld. So it's a very unique and creative way to reinterpret those stories. But again, as I said, the balance. That is a very, very important and major thing. The role of technology. The next point, innovation in technology. From digital effects to interactive elements offers new tools to enhance storytelling, allowing us to create immersive and unforgettable experience. As I have been continuously poking to one particular sentence, balancing the old and the new. That's very, very important. The goal is to find harmonious blend of tradition and innovation. We must be mindful of the legacy of the original text while being brave enough to explore new artistic frontiers. Till now, that's all. That's all of my presentation. If Roshanji can help me with interactions.
Just stay there.
Okay.
So that's the premise that he is built on. But we could also be interested in knowing a little about your theater experience. About your theater experience.
Yes, yes, definitely.
You directed kind of plays or you have adapted stories that you eventually, ended up staging, or performing on stage. That would be interesting briefly, but then we may have other questions also, I'm quite sure.
Okay. As I started with one sentence, I love theater. And since last around 15 years, I have been experiencing theater, but actively I'm doing since last 13 years. As I forgot ma'am's name, she complimented me with one thing, you're so young to achieve a lot of things. Thank you so much, ma'am. Uh, I don't know if it was my call or I just fell in love with theater so much that I kind of left my job at that time just to do theater, and I'm happy right now that I did that. And during theater, it's not only that I practiced theater. Theater has two different dimensions. One is performing art dimension. Another is the application of theater. We call it applied theater. So I'm more into applied theater. What is applied theater? Using theater as a therapeutic tool, and the performance can help enhancing social changes, particular community development, for it can be for any school, for any local areas or any community, using theater as an application for a prominent visible change. So during that, I have done a lot of adaptation. Basically, I am from Calcutta, Bengal. So I have mostly done with Bengali writers like Rabindranath Tagore, Narayan Gangopadhyay, Vibhutibhushan Mukhopadhyay. But yes, also Habib Tanvir and Sadat Hasan Manto. I have done these adaptations. But the fun part, I would like to share something. I have worked with privileged kids and underprivileged kids also. I have worked in tribal areas and city boys and girls also. So, for few, literature, as I said, is not a very accessible thing. It's a luxury to use, to read, to experience literature. They just grow up with cinemas, the edited copies of original content. Yes, as I said, adaptation is required to grab a new era, new dimension, but originality you should read. If one person or every audience read the main context, main book after watching the movie, that's the success of adaptation, I guess. So what happened when I was working with multiple underprivileged kids or tribal communities? Multiple times I have done adaptations. Um, for the first time they are hearing, I have experienced Rabindranath Tagore. In our Bengal, at least, we may forget our known name, but we don't forget Rabindranath Tagore. But some of the kids, they are from Bengal or some surrounded areas, they don't even know who is. Like, will you believe if someone says, who is Shah Rukh Khan? You will not believe that. So I also didn't believe that who is he, who is she, that who he is telling, I don't know who is Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore has written so many beautiful stories for kids. And when we did the workshops, final performance started, then they started learning about more stories. That's the beauty I enjoyed, I cherished. Just by doing one script adaptation, one interpretations, they started reading Rabindranath Tagore. That can happen. That is the beauty of adaptation. Adaptation is just not only gives you an extra rich, extra mileage or extra audience of your original context. It also starts, I guess, plant a seed inside your EQ that this world is untouched. You can go towards that. So that is also very wonderful beauty of adaptation. And since then, I have been trying. Yes, I do work on my original content, but I somehow believe that even I'm working on my original content, original scripts, that is also adapted unconsciously. Some of those texts, some of those characters, some of those plot, somehow I'm unconsciously adapting from somewhere. I may not know from where. So that's my experience. And since I'm here in Dharamshalas more than a year, I have plans to keep working here in Dharamshala with theatre. Rather, I have started already some initiative to let people know that I am here. We can do drama. चलो नाटक करते हैं, चलो movie बनाते हैं, चलो कुछ करते हैं. So we can gradually grow more with a few more adaptation, knowingly and unknowingly, consciously or subconsciously.
All
That's
right.
all.
Now, can we have questions from the audience, please? अजय भाई इसको ठीक करो यार. Yeah, Saurabh,
कोई
I,
mic?
you'll be audible, no problem.
Okay. Yes.
So we live in times where we are now kind of consume content that is more snackable, right? It's like we consume content that is into bits and pieces. So how would you like to understand the future of adaptation? And what do you understand that how adaptation studies are now going to change or evolve when it comes to when it comes to our, say, attention spans, they are gradually reducing by and by. So how would you like to then, view adaptation studies? What kind of changes could exist in adaptation studies?
Okay. So I'd like to start with one thing. We're living in such country where our all the brand names that we use daily, all the product we use, all the names we got from our father, mother, and grandpas, that's have been adapted from somewhere. And even if I can't name because it's been recorded live, live streaming is going on. I cannot name any brand names. But if you think of your daily FMCG products, there are lots of products that has been adapted from mythology or old musical orchestras or something, instruments or something or the other. So yes, I'll address your question now. Yes, attention span is decreasing. That's true. It will decrease more and more until we lost our attention. So the format is also changing. Now we have short films. We didn't have few years back. Now we have microfilms. What is microfilms? 5 minutes, 1 minute films. By the way, those microfilms are nothing like TikTok and Instagram influencing things. So please don't confuse with Instagram or Facebook influencer presentations or TikTokers with microfilms. It's a completely different ballgame. So New things are coming up like micro series, 1 minute episode, 5 or 10 episodes in a season. Okay. That can feed your smaller attention span. At the same time, can give you the same kind of feel. Obviously, the feel will be not exactly same, but it will feed your smaller attention with the new era of adaptation that is there. Another thing, that's why I am more into theater. When you are watching a live performance, your attention span get increased. When you see something recorded on your mobile or on screen, your attention span gets decreased. That is psychologically proven. So theater, it's a very live thing. It can be nukkar natak on street, it can be intimate cafe theater, it can be proscenium theater on stage. But when you watch theater, you get more engaged and you watch 1 or 2.5 hours drama. If someone can make that more attractive, your attention will get fixed. So that's why we are somewhere known as activists also. We're trying. And why I'm saying we, because I cannot do. We can do. So that's my answer to you. I hope I answered. Yeah, sure.
Repercussions on the reading culture, wherein the reading culture is diminishing because of our attention span being diminishing, right? So, the modern mass media, it has resulted in that, lack of reading culture now in universities and everywhere else. So, how would you respond to that?
Yes, reading culture is overall decreasing. Yes. Am I allowed to be brutal?
Yeah.
It
You
will
are.
decrease more. It will decrease more and more every single day. Yeah, sure.
Wait, beta, Nikhil? Yes. Nikhil, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Can you please repeat?
I mean, what about the non-linear daily almost going on and, each individual has his own subjective in terms of having his own mobile phone. So probably people have their own subjective choices. So what do you think about the dynamics and its adaptation in theater and everything?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I can answer both of you, as I've already answered you. I can adjust the questions. See, theater is not for everyone. Everyone cannot come to watch theaters because it is as its impact is greater than film, but its reach is very lesser than film. So it cannot reach everywhere. But yes, today we have phone, we have mobiles. A lot of people, even these days, do not use Instagram and Facebook. A lot of people are there. So what about those people who are not aware of new things that are on the way and new technology, new functions, new mediums are coming up with the adaptations? Yeah, you want to say something?
What do you think about discourses in theater? How theater has been manipulated over the years, and what discourses you can put into make it more of an prominence?
Yes,
Prominence,
yes. So the thing is that it depends on a lot of things. It depends on a lot of things. First, uh, if we talk about this location, this comes under Kangra. Anyone knows why the place is called Kangra? Anyone? This is the history of this place. If someone from this place, a lot of people doesn't know. Being an outsider, I know because I wanted to. So there is a want is working every time. There is always be a choice for some people at least. Even if you don't find your favorite book, you will search, you will borrow, you will get printouts, you will do something if you want. Yes, we can work on creating or pushing the want. We can try. That's what we are doing, pushing the boundaries so that we can want. if we start, the moment we will start wanting, everything, the job is done. Already the job is done, the moment we start wanting. But the main problem is, as I said, theater has limitation, but it has more impact. Film has more rich, but its impact is also very, very prominent. But as I said, now we are converting into OTT platforms more than, as already it has started, all tickets are getting more less audience. People are more watching on Netflix, Amazon, Jio Hotstars and all. But we have a lot of engaging things that we can do. Like if directors and story writers, storytellers, everyone is storytellers, all of us, if we come up with that particular balance, as I said, the original literature and the adaptation we are making, most of the places, the most important challenge we face in the name of adaptation, we change even the root, we change even the original essence sometimes because of the commercial aspects and a lot of things. We sometimes change the main essence. So here, a lot of people do not find relevant to know about the original script, original story by watching a movie because everything is changed. So the person, very less directors, very less creators are working on the balance of everything. They are taking the original content, keeping the essence, but using the new technology. There, people are knowing about, okay, there is a thing called Macbeth. There is a thing. There was a person called Shakespeare. So that's how it will work. But gradually, the increase and decrease part will their tug of war will do. I don't know about a lot of thing about technology. I'm not much tech savvy person, so I don't know how AI transform into new generation. Now, few people doesn't need to even make their own movies. AI is making movies for them. So I don't know what will happen with the adaptation in upcoming weeks. But till now, that's why I am stuck with theater because AI can't do a single thing.
Okay.
When I listen to you, so just wondering of my own experience of developing Kolkata when I was very young, during the 80s. And that very famous, theatre, not only on by showing rituals. How theatre actually had arisen or actually had given us a consciousness the governance of some baby. Yes, yes. That's basically telling me that you have told that you are using theatre as an application, applied theatre. So please briefly share your experience that you have done, okay, with working with the urban children versus tribal children. That will be very much, I am very interested in that.
Sure. See, the main few points are urban children, most of them that we have worked with, they already know the names, the basics. They may not know the deeper thing, but they know the basics from their parents, their families, their surroundings. Uh, but tribal kids, most of them, they didn't even know with whom I have worked. So there is a good part and bad part, like plus minus, both are there. The kids
Just one. It's this feelings. What what changes in
Okay. So, like, I can talk about Tasha of Rabindranath Tagore. So, while working with urban business, I have to consider both of them, tribal and urban kids. So, what happened, about Tasha few of the urban kids, they knew about the story, basic guidelines, basic lines from their parents, maybe, and they knew about Rabindranath Tagore. They knew few context about his write-ups and literatures, but the influences they got, actually, I feel sometimes knowing nothing is better than knowing wrong. So what happens by the influences of some parents, not everyone, by the influences of some parents, they got the very wrong idea about the particular context. So I had to erase those ideas because I'm talking about kids. So I cannot manipulate them. I have to be honest with them. So I had to erase the complete idea of what they had. Then I had to put the fresh idea of this is Tasha's days. I am doing this with you because of this reason. So we are not doing the entire Tasha days as it was written. So we will adapt something from it and we will make out of it. So that was one thing. But the same thing with tribal kids, I rather had a easier way to work with them because they didn't know anything. What I said, they did. That's the main key point that happened. Rest of it, it was fun because kids are always reliable. I feel they if I'm giving them fun, they will do everything for me. So I never had a problem with working with kids. But the main differentiation I can do talk about is this.
Yeah, Professor Devarati, the last one.
Learn something new about the real process of the literary text being transformed into something on the stage and then onto the screen. Do you mean at least one of texts which have undergone this process in your experience?
As I said, I can name three content. One is, as I already said, Tashet Desh by Rabindranath Tagore. Another one is, it was Tashet Desh only. Okay. Already we have a movie called Tashet Desh. The director's name is Kaushik. Kaushik, Tashet Desh is there. And if you want film examples, then famous examples are there already, Makbul, Macbeth. And if I talk about theater,
Text means something which was not meant for the theater in the first place.
yeah.
From that theater and then on the screen. That is the thing.
Okay. Then, yes. One example I can give you that was actually Tashet Desh is a very prominent example. I'll repeat again Tashet Desh. It was not for movie, not for screen, basically, at the very primary stage. But now we have one movie on Tashet Desh. It, it was done recently, not recently, 6, 7 years ago, at least. I don't remember the exact year of the release, but you'll find it. It was primarily a text, then theater, then movie. Then. And another story I can tell you about Sadat Hussain Manto. He's a very prominent and famous persona. I have worked two things like content of from his literature experiences. One is Kholdo, another is Kholdo, another is I'm forgetting the name right now. Can you help me with the bad guy in asylum which was situated in border? What it's I remember the story but forgot the name. So but it's in Kholdo.
All right.
That's it.
All right.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I don't know. I'm sorry. Even I know, I just forgot. I cannot process the name right now. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, quickly, the last one.
Just one thing I ask that when we are translating, we consider the translatability of any text. And when you're adapting, is there something called adaptability? Do you consider that? I mean, are there some particular parameters that you consider that this text is adaptable for screen or for the stage?
Yes, there are.
What are those exactly?
It depends on the director or the producer who will be producing the content. It depends on their thought process. For me, how that works is like, if I find, it's a very simple process. It's nothing big. For me, it's completely my personal experience. If I get 3 stages of a story, I find that adaptable. The first stage and the second stage, all the stages should not match with each other. The flow should break. If I see the flow is getting constantly breaking down in the storyline, the main content, main text, that is adaptable for me. Now I start working on that. Like how it started and how it ended, but completely distinctly different. That I find interesting. It's my completely personal thing. But there are certain things called adaptability, and it depends on creator to creator.
You. Thank you, Suman. Thank you very much. So I think Namrata also had a question. Of course, the conversations are going to be there. They are going to go on and on and on. You could ask a question over lunch, of course. So thank you, Suman. Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us, of course. And the question, very specific one that you had, because you are the one who's practicing, adaptation in your own way, of course. And you're young, and you've got a long way to go. But what I appreciate about you is that you've been working with, kids from deprived, sections of the society. And particularly your take on how these tribal kids respond to, your take on whatever story you would like to adapt and make workable for them. And another thing is like, we are in this age of digitalization, and there are so many different genres coming. Attention span, you talked about, reading habits, everything is coming up. But Sumanta, in one respect is right that, these content creators these days, they are they have got to be on the constant kind of watch as to which direction and how we are moving, and how times are changing, and what are the needs, what are the requirements of the changing times and everything. And this problem of attention span, let me tell you, Sumanta, is something that we English teachers or literature teachers grapple with like anything. So if students, say for that matter, do not have this habit of reading and reading for long hours seriously or something, where do we go? We don't understand. We understand one thing, that fine, the mode possibly could have undergone a change. It may be screen today, and during yesteryears, it used to be a book or something, but you still have to sit nonetheless. And this particular kind of study that you brought in, that your attention span actually, it gets impeded if you're on screen compared to, how it would happen when you're reading a book actually. That the study you mentioned there, and fine. Yeah, there remains lots and lots of temptations, when it comes to screen, because ultimately वो छोटी सी बात है, दुनिया मेरी मुट्ठी में. And this particular kind of, because it's there, it's available all the while. Let me tell you one thing, you brought in PDFs also. See my story, it's so sad. If you see my personal library today, I don't know how many, I must be having several thousand PDFs of very good books, but they are there, and I can proudly boast of the fact that they are there. How many have I actually read, assimilated, benefited from? With that's an altogether different question, because storing them simply, by way of simple kicks is different. But even say for the engaging with PDF, in a meaningful way in altogether different way. But then coming back to where we are and where we are going to be for the coming 2 days, adaptation. This I view it as, you know, as a continuity, as an endless kind of process. It goes on and on and on, and it has been proven time and again. We've got, you know, adaptations of one particular text, you know, in several forms, movies, etc., etc. And if Devarati or Manpreet, or say for that matter, Pragya, are going to pin me down, Roshan, name them, I'll miserably fail, like Sumanta did in several ways. But yes, stories are there. And at times, what happens is that one particular story has been told in a particular way, you're not happy with that. And particularly because I've been into theater for quite some time. And what happens is that you see performance, various different performances of one particular play, but you're not happy the way, you know, one particular person has envisioned it, planned it, and you want to do it so very differently. And then the ways, of course, responding to the same kind of play in a very innovative way. And you can't imagine, I mean, how these young directors these days, you know, who are into theater, how innovative and how creative they are. Thank you, Sumanta, for being with us. And I'm sure we're going to grow more. You've got one creative. Are you part of some creative circle here? You have got this club. What's the name of the club? The Mystic Minds. The Mystic Minds, yeah. It's actually a club that is there. It's a group that he leads. And youngsters too, if they want to be part of it, they can contact Sumanta. But thank you very much for your patience hearing, and we appreciate Sumanta. Thank you, Sumanta. And now we are going to break for lunch, and after lunch we are going to have ISM session. So in the beginning we are going to have ISM special lecture, and thereafter, of course, 3 presentations for the best paper award. Thank you all. Thank you very much.